picture it in 1944. Representatives from 44 allied nations gather at the Mount Washington Hotel in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. Inside that hall, they're about to make a decision that will shape the world's economy for the next 8 decades. Britain, the global financial leader for over 200 years, is broke. Its national debt has reached 249% of GDP. After 2 world wars, the empire that once ruled the seas is drained, and everyone in that room knows it. So they take a step rarely seen in history. They shift the status of the world's reserve currency from one empire to another, from the British pound to the American dollar. But this was more than a financial transition. It was part of a long-running pattern that has unfolded for over 500 years, a recurring cycle of ascent, dominance, overreach, and decline. Every global reserve currency has followed the same path. And today, the US dollar shows the same warning signs that marked the fall of every one before it. To see what lies ahead, we have to look back. The rise of Portugal. In 1450, the Portuguese real became the first true global reserve currency. For about 80 years, Portugal led international trade. This wasn't by chance. They transformed navigation and global commerce by mapping new sea routes to Africa, Asia, and the Americas. When Constantinople fell to the Ottomans in 1453, the traditional spice routes were cut off by hostile powers. Portugal found a way around, literally sailing around Africa and opening the age of discovery. Lisbon became the center of global trade, and the Portuguese real was accepted across continents from Europe to Asia. At its height, Portugal's empire stretched across Africa, India, Malaysia, Japan, and even into China through Macau. But as always, success came with overreach. Maintaining military outposts on 4 continents drained the treasury. Competition from the Dutch, British, and French intensified. Then a succession crisis in the 1530s shook the monarchy. By 1580, Spain absorbed Portugal into the Iberian Union. The Portuguese real had ruled world trade for 80 years, and then it vanished, replaced by Spanish silver. Spain's Age of Silver. Spain's ascent began with the discovery of the richest silver deposit on Earth, the mountain of Potosi, high in the Bolivian Andes, found in 1545. It produced nearly half of the world's silver between 1575 and 1635. The Spanish minted their pieces of 8 in Potosi, marked with a P, and those coins became the first truly global currency. The Spanish dollar was the most stable and trusted coin in the Western world from the 16th through the 19th century. It was even legal tender in the United States until 1857. Spain's dominance lasted about 110 years, from the 1530s to the 1640s. But then the familiar signs appeared: overextension and crushing debt. Charles I left his son Philip Roman II buried under 36 million ducats of debt, with 1 million more each year in deficits. Philip defaulted 4 separate times in 1557, 1560, 1575, and 1596. The endless inflow of New World silver fueled massive inflation. Prices in Spain quadrupled under his reign. When silver production fell by half under Philip Roman III, the economy collapsed again, leading to bankruptcy in 1607. By 1641, the Iberian Union had fallen apart, and Spain's monetary supremacy was over. The Dutch Financial Revolution. Next came the Dutch Republic. In the 1600s, Amsterdam became the world's financial capital. The Dutch guilder, supported by innovation and trade, became Europe's de facto reserve currency. The Bank of Amsterdam introduced reliable systems for international payments. Dutch merchants pioneered modern finance, creating the first stock exchange, marine insurance, and new instruments like publicly traded shares and acceptance credit. From 1642 to 1720, about 78 years, the Dutch guilder dominated global trade, accounting for more than a third of all international transactions. But like those before them, the Dutch fell into the same trap. Military overreach, particularly during the Fourth Anglo-Dutch War from 1780 to 1784, bankrupted the country. The Dutch East India Company collapsed under pressure from British rivals. By the late 1700s, Britain had risen to take its place. Britain's imperial century. The pound sterling, backed by industrial might and an immense colonial empire, became the next global reserve currency. For over 2 centuries, from the 1720s to 1944, it dominated global trade longer than any currency in modern history. At its height, more than 60% of all world trade was conducted in pounds. London became the center for global insurance, commodities, and investment. The gold standard reinforced the pound's strength, and after the Great Recoinage of 1816, Britain's currency was considered the most stable on earth. By 1922, the British Empire ruled over 458 million people, one-fifth of the global population and a quarter of the planet's land. Britain's financial supremacy seemed unshakable. Then came the familiar decline. World War I exploded Britain's national debt from £650 million in 1914 to over £7 billion by 1919. The Second World War was even more devastating. By 1945, debt reached 270% of GDP. Britain had won the war, but lost its economic dominance. Bretton Woods and the dollar era. That brings us back to Bretton Woods in 1944. Between July 1st and July 22nd, over 700 delegates from 44 nations met to rebuild the global financial system. Their agreement created the International Monetary Fund (IMF) and the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, now known as the World Bank. The Bretton Woods system pegged major currencies to the US dollar and the dollar itself to gold at $35 per ounce. The transition from pound to dollar was now official. For the next 25 years, the US dollar reigned supreme until 1971, when President Richard Nixon ended the dollar's convertibility to gold. The gold standard was gone, but the dollar didn't collapse. It found a new foundation: oil. After the 1973 OPEC oil crisis, the U.S. struck a deal with Saudi Arabia, American military protection in exchange for selling oil exclusively in US dollars. By 1975, every OPEC nation had joined. Thus, the petrodollar was born. Because every country needed oil, every country needed dollars. This created artificial global demand, letting the U.S. run massive deficits that would have destroyed any other currency. For decades, dollar dominance went unquestioned. At its peak around 2000, more than 70% of the world's foreign exchange reserves were held in dollars. But that's changing. By 2024, that figure had fallen to 57.8%. Foreign ownership of US treasuries dropped from over 50% during the 2008 financial crisis to just 30% in early 2025. The emerging shift. De-dollarization is accelerating. The BRICS nations Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa have expanded to include Egypt, Ethiopia, Indonesia, Iran, and the UAE. Together, they're building systems that bypass the dollar altogether. As of 2025, 10 BRICS members and 13 partner nations are developing the BRICS Bridge Payment Network, designed to settle trades using central bank digital currencies. Meanwhile, America's own balance sheet is under severe strain. By March 6, 2025, U.S. public debt reached $29 trillion, with another $7.4 trillion in intergovernmental holdings, a total of $36.4 trillion, or 124% of GDP. And once again, the pattern repeats. Portugal, Spain, the Netherlands, and Britain all followed the same trajectory, each lasting between 78 and 220 years, averaging about 95. The US dollar has been the reserve currency for 81 years since Bretton Woods. We're nearing that historical inflection point. The 4 stages of empire. Every reserve currency has gone through 4 distinct phases: rise, peak, overextension, and collapse. Stage 1, rise. A nation gains global dominance through innovation in trade, finance, or military power. Portugal mastered navigation. Spain unleashed a flood of silver. The Dutch built modern finance. Britain led the Industrial Revolution. The US rose through post-war industry. Stage 2, peak. The reserve currency becomes nearly universal, used in more than 60% of global trade. The empire appears untouchable. Stage 3, overextension. Cracks begin to form. Military costs soar, debt piles up, productivity falls. Portugal spread itself too thin across continents. Spain defaulted repeatedly. The Dutch bankrupted themselves fighting Britain. Britain's debt hit 270% of GDP after 2 world wars. Today, the US carries debt at 124% of GDP and has spent over $8 trillion on Middle East conflicts. Stage 4, collapse. The reserve currency loses trust and power shifts elsewhere. Every empire has faced this reckoning. Echoes of the past. Portugal never regained its influence after being absorbed by Spain in 1580. Spain, despite its vast silver wealth, fell into centuries of decline. The Netherlands remained prosperous but shrank to a regional power. Britain, though still wealthy, saw its empire fade after 1945. By the 1950s, 55% of global reserves were still held in sterling, but within 2 decades that share plunged. The British century ended and the American one began. Yet these transitions never happen overnight. Britain's decline took decades. The US surpassed Britain economically long before the dollar replaced the pound as the global reserve. The same gradual shift may now be underway, this time toward China and a more multipolar world. Across history, reserve currencies have averaged about 95 years in power. The dollar is 81 years into its run. The signs are familiar. Global reserve share dropping from 70% to 58%, foreign treasury demand shrinking, BRICS alternatives growing, petrodollar ties loosening, and a sprawling US military presence 900 bases across 130 countries. The same pattern that has defined 5 centuries of economic history is repeating. The only questions left are how quickly the transition unfolds and who leads the next financial era. Will it be gradual, like Britain's slow descent, or abrupt, like the Dutch collapse? Will one new power rise, or will the future be shared among several currencies? History doesn't repeat exactly, but it rhymes, and if the rhyme holds true, we're approaching the final verses of the dollar's dominance. If you found this breakdown thought-provoking, share it with someone curious about how money, power, and history always seem to move in cycles.